Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have some interesting election news for the 2026 midterms, where Republican Representative Nancy Mace has officially launched a campaign to be the next governor of the state of South Carolina. Now this is very interesting because if you're unfamiliar, the Republican governor's race in South Carolina is currently held by Republican incumbent Henry McMaster. Now McMaster is term limited and cannot seek a third consecutive term. He took office on January 24, 2017, upon the resignation of fellow Republican Governor Nikki Haley to serve or become U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations under the first President Trump administration. Now, this race was already getting very competitive before Nancy Mace joined it, but with Mace now in the race, things are very heated and contentious right now. Alan Wilson, the South Carolina Attorney General, was one of the first Republicans to join this race. Then Pamela Evette, the Lieutenant Governor of the state of South Carolina, also announced she was running for this race. A few days ago, U.S. Representative Ralph Norman announced he would be running for this race as well, including State Senator Josh Kimbrell, and now Nancy Mace, the U.S. Representative, is officially running. And there are a lot of notable Republicans in this race, and it's going to be interesting to watch to see how these candidates start out, who gets the most of the support, does any key endorsements in this race end up happening here. Another state senator, Sean Bennett, has expressed interest in running as well, but the major players in this field, I think, are essentially set. Now, Pamela Evette has the endorsement of the former chair of the South Carolina Republican Party, Karen Floyd, and James Livingston, a retired U.S. Marine Corps Major General. Ralph Norman already has the endorsements of Nikki Haley and Mark Meadows, former governor of South Carolina and now former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and U.S. Senator Jim DeMint, former senator from South Carolina from 2005 to 2013, whereas Alan Wilson has the endorsement of 22 county sheriffs. Now, this is going to be very interesting to watch for on this race. Do national Republicans decide to play a role here? Who does President Trump end up endorsing in this race? Does Vice President Vance make an endorsement in this race? Maybe do Senators Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham decide to make an endorsement in this race, and for who? These are all very big indicators of which party or which candidate in this primary may end up having a lead going into 2026. The early polling that's been done thus far have shown a very tight competitive race. The first poll from back in March from Trafalgar Group, obviously a very top President Trump aligned pollster, showed Pamela Evette with 31%, Nancy Mace got 29%, Alan Wilson got 27%, and Ralph Norman got 11%. In the first Tuesday Strategies poll from also back in March, it showed in this one, Alan Wilson with 21%, Nancy Mace with 16%, Ralph Norman had 6%, Pamela Evette had 7%, and 47% were undecided in that one. And now in the South Carolina Policy Council poll, it showed Nancy Mace in first place with 16%, Alan Wilson 15%, Ralph Norman with 6%, Pamela Evette with 8%, 52% undecided. So these two most recent polls are obviously a lot different in terms of the results of the Trafalgar poll from back in March, but it shows that so far, I would say Ralph Norman starts out probably around third or fourth place at this point in time, and Nancy Mace and Alan Wilson are starting with pretty high floors of support. Now the wild card here is going to be Pamela Evette, who in two straight polls has finished under 10%, but in that first Trafalgar poll, she did get 31% support there. So that's going to be something very interesting to watch for. Is Pamela Evette able to have support in this race on the levels of the Trafalgar poll or on the two most recent polls where she has not broken 10? That's going to be very important to watch here. What I do know for this race is Nancy Mace and Alan Wilson have already made a lot of comments in the media about each other, Mace accusing Wilson of some pretty bad and pretty terrible things. So certainly the Republican primary between Mace and Wilson, if they're both in this race, is going to get very heated, while Pamela Evette and Ralph Norman try and carve out their own lane in this race, likely probably staying above the fray of what Mace and Wilson will do. But it's going to be a very interesting Republican primary that's going to be very hotly contested. On the Democratic side of things, only one Democrat has formed an exploratory committee. That's Jermaine Johnson, a state representative from the 70th District. And the lack of Democratic competition makes a lot of sense when you consider the predictions for this race. Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Sabado's Crystal Ball all have this race listed as safe for the Republicans. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how South Carolina votes, in 2024, it voted for Donald Trump for president by about 18% versus Kamala Harris. Back in 2020, it was actually a little bit more competitive. Trump won it by 11.7%. Back in 2016, it voted for Trump by 14.3%. So in the last three presidential cycles, 2024 was the most Republican that South Carolina has been. On the governor's side of things, Henry McMaster won re-election in 2022 by 17.4% against the Democrat Cunningham. And then back in 2018, McMaster won by only 8 points in this race against the Democrat Smith. So South Carolina has the potential where it could go under 15% and be a likely Republican win in a competitive race, but we're not really seeing anything right now that suggests that. We'll have to wait and see for some general election polling that says otherwise on that. Now, also, I just want to briefly talk about the House elections in South Carolina. As Nancy Mace represents this district, the 1st district, South Carolina won. It was a safe Republican win in 2024. The current Cook Political Voting Index for this district is Republican +6, so that would be considered more of a likely Republican district. It doesn't mean that the Democrats can't win it, but the Republicans would have an advantage in this district. Without Mace running, though, it would be interesting to see if the Democrats make this district a little bit more competitive than maybe it otherwise would be. It's also worth interesting, as I mentioned, that Ralph Norman represents the 5th district, so that district is also being vacated as well. So could be very interesting to watch for the South Carolina second one. This is Joe Wilson, no relation to Alan Wilson. But yeah, so Ralph Norman's district, Nancy Mace's district are both up on the House elections for 2026 if they both stay in this race. And that district for Ralph Norman is Republican +12. So both of these districts are likely Republican districts, probably going to remain with the Republicans in 2026, but they may be a little bit more competitive on the margins of victories without their 2 incumbents running in this race. So for the governor's prediction for 2026, my most recent governor map, I do have the state going as safe for the Republicans. Again, it's possible in the Democrats' sort of best case scenario, it falls under 15 points and ends up being a likely Republican win. But I think the Republicans are going to hold on here and win a pretty strong victory in the state of South Carolina. Now we can look really quickly here at the 2024 presidential results in the state of South Carolina more in depth if you'd like, where Trump won by 18 points, as I mentioned, and we'll go a little bit more in depth here on South Carolina and how some of the counties broke down. Now, Charleston County, which does, I believe, include part of Nancy Mace's district, or Charleston County, also has the city of Charleston as well, and it voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump 52 to 46%. Now, it should be worth noting that Charleston is the 2nd largest county in the state in terms of the vote numbers. From 2024, Greenville is the largest, 263,000. But again, in such a overwhelming Republican state, even a Democratic win in Charleston is not enough when you look at all the rest of the Republican areas, including Greenville County, where President Trump won it by about 22 points. Now, if you're going to see a competitive governor election, you're probably going to see Charleston going blue by larger numbers. Columbia was 66 to 32 for Harris versus Trump. You'll probably see those numbers be up about another 3 or 4%. But you're probably going to see Greenville, which was a 22-point victory for Trump versus Harris. You're probably going to see this county being a lot less red in a competitive general election, if that is what's going to happen. If the Democrats are able to do better than they otherwise would be, you would likely see Greenville being more competitive. Rock Hill was another close-ish area, which was a 19-point victory for Donald Trump in 2024. You would likely see this county be more competitive if the Democrats are having a good election. But there are so many smaller Republican counties that have really just racked up the numbers, like Beaufort County, Jasper, Colleton, Dorchester County, Berkeley, Georgetown, Horry. These counties are just like tens of thousands of votes, and they go a lot for the Republicans and really boost the numbers of the Republicans in the state. So for the Democrats to do well in the governor's race here, they would have to really cut into those counties and make up a lot of ground that right now looks pretty hard, if not impossible, for them to do. The only thing that could throw a wrench in this is if one of the Republican candidates decided to run a third-party campaign, sort of essentially like I'm mad you're running against me or something in the primary, and they want to try and get the last laugh. I don't know South Carolina's election laws, if they can even do that. That would be the only real scenario where I think a Democrat could have a chance at winning this race. So again, South Carolina, I make safe for the Republicans. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video.